welcome to another episode of the Earle Wellbeing Show. And I have got a mouth-watering episode lined up for you today, as I have just been joined here in my studios by one of the nation's best-loved restaurateurs and cookery writers. He is the author of not one, but 7 best-selling cookery books and has been a weekly columnist for the Saturday Guardian for over 13 years. There, he is best known for sharing his infectious love of veg and has been singing the praises of cauliflowers, pomegranates, lemons, and his firm favourite, aubergine. My guest, of course, is Yotam Ottolenghi, and he's here to share more about his new book, Flavour, and he reveals how to totally transform everyday veggies into magical dishes, whether they be weeknight dinners or seasonal showstoppers. Now, don't forget, if you would like to watch my chat with Yotam, you can head over to the Earle Wellbeing YouTube channel. Otherwise, settle in, put the kettle on, and let's get into this week's episode. So Yotam, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for finding my little studio.
Yeah.
Bit tucked away.
Yeah, but very charming nonetheless.
You got here. So let's start at the very beginning. You were born and grew up in Jerusalem, is that right?
Yes, I did. The son of the 1970s and 80s.
Okay.
And I spent the first few adult years of my life being a little bit confused. I went to university.
Yeah.
And I studied philosophy and literature. And when I finished that, I thought maybe that's not quite the place for me. And then that's when I started cooking in the late 1990s.
So did you grow up with food then? Did you grow up? Because I've been to Jerusalem and I've enjoyed the most amazing meals.
Yeah, Jerusalem has very good food.
Yeah.
And I grew up with very good food, both at home, because both my parents were very good cooks. And also outside the home. If you traveled in Jerusalem, you know there's a lot of street food. There's a lot of beautiful restaurants that serve meze, and you know the whole kind of Middle Eastern atmosphere is just it's wonderful. It's intoxicating, and
completely.
I grew up in all this.
And then to make the leap to actually professionally cooking, how did that happen? So you presumably came to the UK?
I came to the UK in 1997, and I went to the Cordon Bleu Cookery School to take a couple of courses. Anyone who's tasted my food, would know that it's anything but French.
Yes.
So I've always been that I need to explain that, but I've had a really good basic training there for a few months, and then I just started working in patisseries and restaurants in London. And I wasn't always, for quite a while, I wasn't entirely sure that this is going to be my last career station, cooking or food. It was really hard. I was kind of nearly 30, and I was thinking, is that the right place for me? But I fell in love with it, and I persevered, and the rest is history.
Well, we're very glad you did, because I think you're the godfather of bringing so many interesting things into more of the mainstream. For example, I had some burrata for lunch today and I sprinkled pomegranate seeds on it. And I immediately thought of you, because you are the guy who has brought us pomegranate seeds, or certainly things like pomegranate molasses as key ingredients, which I think none of us were using before you promoted it.
Yeah, well, for me, those ingredients that are kind of the core Middle Eastern ingredients, tahini and pomegranates, rosewater and preserved lemons and all these things, were things that were familiar and I grew up with. So it wasn't like I was inventing something. I was just kind of cooking with the things that were familiar to me. But I also realized that it was very effective here, because essentially what happened is that I think in the last couple of decades, since I started operating here, people have really wanted, first of all, 2 things: wanted to cook more vegetables and eat more vegetables, which wasn't the case before. Quite the opposite. And they wanted to do exciting things with vegetables. So I come along and I find a real keen audience to the message of actually vegetables are amazing. It's just what you do with them.
Yeah.
So all these Middle Eastern condiments are really, really good, fantastic good way to kind of squeeze out every inch of flavor from a vegetable, whether it's a cauliflower or a tomato or a courgette or pulses
Yeah.
or grains. These are just things that need a little bit of help. It's easier sometimes with with other foodstuffs, like a good beautiful piece of fish. You can pan fry it and squeeze a lemon, and it's almost kind of you're done. But vegetables, you can't do that with a potato. You need
It
just
needs a help.
a little bit more help. Yeah.
Yeah. Now tell me about zatar, because you talk about condiments, but that again is something that we very much associate with you and having kind of brought that to us. What is it and how should we be using it?
Zatar is so there's also a misconception because some people call it a herb blend or a spice blend, which is actually not true. So zatar is a name used throughout Palestine, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, that part of the Levant, for a particular herb that grows wild. It's from the department of the oregano or
Okay, so like a
thyme
sort of
or
marjoram,
marjoram. Yeah,
right?
it's called zatar. It's got a very particular flavor, but if you taste it, you could mistake it for oregano.
Right.
And it grows wild, and it has a particularly intense flavor in the very dry season when it's really dry. You know how some herbs and plants really thrive when they don't have
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the moisture, because all the flavors
So
concentrate.
intense.
So when you pick zatar in the hills of Palestine or Israel, and you get those kind of the really really intense marjoram-y oregano flavor, that's the zatar, that's the herb, and it's been in the region for millennia. But the way people know it here is in a dry form, where it's dried and ground into powder, and it's mixed with sumac, which is another it's a berry that's dried and pounded. It's quite red and it's very acidic. So zatar, the herb, is mixed with sumac, sesame seed, and salt, and creates a
Right.
green powder, and that's also called zatar. So the powder itself, which is
Okay.
the mix,
So the blend,
the blend
but
is
it contains
but it
zatar, the
names
herb.
after the main herb, the main ingredient in it.
Interesting. So zatar, sumac berry, sesame,
Sesame
and
and
salt,
salt,
and
yeah,
you grind
toasted
it
sesame and
together.
salt, all mixed together, and it's powder. And so when I go to the supermarket and I see a jar and says zata, and then you look at the list of ingredients and it says thyme, chopped up parsley, and
Yeah.
salt and sesame, I said that is just not za'atar. I mean, whatever
Okay.
you want to call it.
Yeah.
So you really need the original
Yeah.
herb in order to make it properly. So the ones that you should really get are imported from the Middle East.
Yeah. And should we always be grinding our own? I mean, do we need a pestle and mortar? I mean, that's presumably how you work to make it fresh.
No. You buy the powder, so you
Okay.
can go and get the herbs, but you can get dried za'atar leaves in some Middle Eastern shops.
Oh,
But
interesting.
what I would buy, and most
Yeah.
people would buy, is that the mix of za'atar, sumac, sesame, and salt, and that gives you the za'atar flavor, and that's very easy to use. You sprinkle it over chicken, over roasted vegetables. You can make confused oil with it that you.
What's a confused oil?
Infused
Oh,
oil.
infused.
Infused
I was
oil.
going to say, I wasn't quite sure
You
where it
could
was coming
create
from.
confusion as well.
Confusion of the labeling, maybe.
Yeah. So infused oil, where you
Yeah.
put it in oil and let it sit, and it flavors the oil.
Nice.
But that goes wonderfully well with aubergines, with courgettes,
Yes.
with roasted pumpkins. Anything
Yeah.
could benefit. Even roasted lamb. Anything
Yeah.
benefits from a drizzle of that za'atar powder mixed with olive oil.
Brilliant. I'm definitely going to try making my own, that's for sure. You, I think, are credited, certainly for me, with my love of aubergines, because I would never, I mean, I just grew up, aubergines were slimy and yuck, just not something to be enjoyed. They were probably boiled to death at school, that kind of thing. What is the best way, your favourite way to cook an aubergine?
So,
Do you have to salt them, first of all? Do you have
sympathize
to slice them and
with
soak them and salt
I
them?
sympathize with your school experiences, because a bad aubergine is a very bad aubergine.
It's a very bad one.
Yeah, it's just not something that you want to eat. But so no, we used to salt them more because the breeds that we get at the moment are not as bitter as they used to be. So historically, the old aubergines were quite bitter. So as you sprinkle them with salt before you cook them, the salt would draw out the moisture, and with it some of the bitterness. This is not necessarily necessary anymore. So if you're going to fry the aubergine, like cut it into thin slices and fry it, I do tend to salt it a bit because that draws out the moisture, and the less moisture, the easier it is to fry. So you don't get
Okay.
that, it becomes crispier. But my favorite way to cook aubergines, I cook them in various ways, but the easiest way for me, and I think for the general public, is to cut them into thick slices, like rounds, about 2 to 3 centimeters thick. So that's like over an inch. So quite a bit
Really thick,
thicker than
chunky.
quite a
Yeah.
bit thicker than you think. And then I brush them on both sides with quite a bit of olive oil. So they need to soak the oil, and sprinkle with coarse sea salt, like molten salt. And put those rounds of aubergines soaked with oil and salted in a very hot oven at 200 or 220 for a good half hour. And what happens is that if you have a lot of them in the tray, they kind of steam and roast at the same time, and they go really meaty. But it's really important not to undercook them. You need to let them really brown nicely.
Okay.
And it's really important to get quite a lot of oil in there. So
Yeah.
they need that oil. They need to drink that oil before you roast them in such a way.
Is olive oil the one oil that you use? Do you have others, or do you tend to default to olive oil all the time?
I default
Yeah.
on olive oil just because I think it's so good. And I don't deep fry with olive oil, obviously, but I shallow fry with olive oil. And I think it's just a wonderful thing. I mean, in certain dishes that I cook, Asian dishes, etc., where I feel that this flavor of the olive oil is just not the right flavor, then I would use a more neutral oil like sunflower oil. But I feel that olive oil does the job for me in 95% of the of the cases, and that's what I use.
I know you're a friend and a fan of Tim Spector, as
Yeah,
am I.
yeah.
In fact, I think we collaborated recently on some filming for the COVID-19 Zoe
Yes.
app,
Oh, yes, we did.
which was really good. And of course, talking to him about olive oil and gut health. That's really interesting. The
Yeah.
extra virgin olive oil and the extra properties that they're kind of discovering now for helping the
From
gut.
all the fats that you're gonna
Yeah.
consume, olive oil is really the one that Tim really found that
Yeah.
is worthy of promoting, because
Yeah.
it's just in the Mediterranean diet, it's become synonymous to healthy eating. That's one of the contributors to health, olive oil. So I'm very happy to use olive oil all the time.
And I think it's the polyphenols that are particularly helpful,
Yeah.
with the gut. When I last saw him, he had these little tiny sachets or little kind of vessels that he'd been given of this olive leaf extract. It was so bitter. But full of tannins. Every time you tasted it, you kind of, it was like sucking a lemon.
Yeah.
It was really, really sharp. But he said, this is just one of the best things for the gut. But presumably, I know your new book is all about vegetables, but that is supremely healthy, isn't it, for the gut? It's all about the insoluble fiber and all your prebiotics to
Absolutely.
feed your gut bacteria.
Yeah.
Do you think that vegetables need a bit more of a kind of starring role on our plates?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think vegetables, grains, legumes are really, they need, I mean, for various reasons. I've never been a preacher. I always think that people should eat what they love to eat. That's the first priority, because you cannot convince someone to eat something that's just strictly good for them unless they really enjoy it. There's just no way people will carry on eating undelicious food. But the thing is, vegetables are totally delicious. So it's a win-win situation if you learn how to treat vegetables well. And in my new book, Flavour, it's all about injecting vegetables with a lot of flavor. We have like flavor bombs, like these combinations of chili and ginger and garlic, or
I love that, flavor bombs.
Yeah,
You should think about that.
or soy sauce and mirin, and things that are really intense. If you let the vegetables sit with those flavors and soak them and kind of benefit from them, then they are equally delicious, if not more delicious, than that beautiful soul that you've done nothing to.
Yeah, for sure. Things like cauliflower, which is kind of a bit of a challenge again, historically overboiled cauliflower is not a favorite, but it will absorb so much, won't it, if you prep it in the right way?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been cooking cauliflowers for a long time. So cauliflower, people wouldn't not normally don't know that, but it's a staple in the Middle East in
Is
Arabic
it?
cooking. Yeah. So when I was growing up, you would get like like the baba ganoush kind of salad with tahini. So you have an equivalent with cauliflower,
Mm.
or yeah, like deep fried cauliflowers in tahini sauce and some parsley on top. It's absolutely delicious.
It's
Uh,
making us all very hungry.
what I've been doing for quite a while now, and it's become familiar to some people, is a whole roasted cauliflower head, where you take the
Yes.
cauliflower with the leaves, open it up so the leaves are kind of pulled out, and put olive oil and butter on it,
Mm.
and lots of nice coarse sea salt, and let it cook for a long time, a good hour or so, and
Mm.
constantly baste it with the fat, with the oil and the
Nice.
butter, and the
Yeah.
leaves are like crisp up, and the cauliflower absorbs all these beautiful fats,
Yeah.
and you get something that you can only almost eat on its own. You can serve that wedge of cauliflower with some a squeeze of lemon or some creme fraiche or just something like that, and it's just a humble cauliflower. There's nothing else there.
Yeah.
There's no tricks. It's
Transformed.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah.
What are the other vegetables that you're particularly keen on that we perhaps aren't so familiar with over here?
Oh, well, I guess with vegetables, I will maybe kohlrabi. People are a little bit scared
Yes.
with kohlrabi, which is it's a kind of Northern European vegetable.
Is it like a turnip?
It's a is it like it's a kind of like for me it's like a cross between a radish and an apple. So it's slightly
Okay.
sweet,
Right.
but it's got the crisp crunchiness and wateriness of radishes, and makes a beautiful, very thinly sliced for a salad. But we also roast it in the book and
Mm.
mix it up with potatoes, like potato matchsticks and kohlrabi matchsticks together, mixed together with a chili spice blend, Korean chili spice mix, and
Nice.
we make like a rosti
Mm.
in a pan. So
Yeah.
all these matchstick pieces held together by this spice paste, and then we throw some eggs on top. So it becomes
Great.
this kind of rosti with like, each one has got a fried egg on top,
Yeah.
and it's just, I mean, there's so many.
Yeah.
Daikon is another kind of
So
Asian
daikon
radish.
is like a white
Yeah,
carrot? Is
it's
it a
like
bit like a
these are
white
a
radish?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a very long carrot.
Right.
It's from the radish family, and in Asian cooking, it's used a lot. We use a daikon to make what we call a turnip cake, which is essentially, it's called a turnip cake, but it uses a daikon because they're often confused.
Mm.
And it's a staple of Chinese restaurants. If you go and have your dim
Mm.
sum,
Yeah.
you have these slices of turnip cake, which are they've got like prawns and pork, and they're really really delicious, served with
Right.
soy sauce. But we've got a vegetarian, a vegan option. In the
Ah.
book, we use chestnut mushrooms
Oh, nice. Yeah.
and the shiitake mushrooms and chestnuts and sesame, and
Mm.
it becomes into, we call it a cake, but it's these kind of thin slices. It looks like a terrine almost, and you drizzle it with soy sauce,
Mm.
and it's really really delicious.
Talking about cakes, what about using vegetables in sweet things? I mean, here, I guess in Britain, we know things like carrot cake,
Mm,
where you physically grate carrot into cakes. I mean, are
yeah.
there other ways that you can use
Oh,
vegetables for desserts?
absolutely. So, in my previous book, Simple, I've got the equivalent of a carrot cake, but using beetroot, and it's a
Mm.
kind of a more of a savory. So it's a kind of a beetroot bread, but because of the high sugar content in
Yeah.
beet, it becomes quite sweet. So it's a wonderful, and it's got some spices and some goat's cheese, and when you cut through it, like a rich bread, and it's absolutely delicious.
Wow.
Yeah,
That does sound
yeah,
wow.
and you can do a carrot cake with turnips, for instance. Like they
Okay.
swap some of the carrots with turnips, and you really also get another
Yeah.
layer, because turnips are quite nutty. So turnips go well with walnuts, or with pecans. So you can kind of swap the nuts and
Mm.
the vegetables, and makes the equivalent of a
Mm.
carrot cake, but with
With turnips.
with parsnips. Excuse me,
Parsnips. Okay.
parsnips,
Well,
not
parsnips are
turnips.
so
Yeah, yeah,
incredibly
yeah,
sweet,
yeah.
aren't they? I mean, almost too sweet. I have to say, I'm not
Sorry.
not a huge fan of parsnips. How do you
But
cook
the
parsnips?
parsnips in a cake are just fantastic. Like
Okay.
they really like this,
Really? Okay.
the
I'll
equivalent of
trust
the
you.
carrot cakes with parsnips and pecans is just delicious.
Parsnip and pecan. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I will try it. Talk to me about pomegranate molasses.
Yeah.
Why do I need it? What am I going to do with it?
um, okay, well, pomegranate molasses is a pomegranate juice that's been reduced to a syrup. It's it's dark and it's very sweet and it's very sharp because pomegranates are very acidic, very sharp. So it's a kind of imagine like a citrusy reduction. So you could use it. The easiest way to is like think of like classic desserts, okay, like an Eton mess. So I often do like a Middle Eastern version of an Eton mess when I take strawberries and meringue, and I add quite a lot of pomegranates and pomegranate molasses on top, and a little bit of rose water.
Oh,
So the
heaven.
rose with the pomegranates and the strawberries, it's a really wonderful
Yes.
combination, and you really don't need to do anything more in order to transform
Yeah.
your Eton mess to something which is completely different
Yeah,
from the
different
origin,
level. Yeah.
but still absolutely delicious. So you can do that with cream, or you can do that vanilla ice cream. So all these things are really good. That's great for pomegranate molasses. But pomegranate molasses, because it's both sweet and sour, it can go both in the sweet direction and in the savory direction. So you can use it in a chicken or lamb marinade because chicken goes well with sweet things. So you can take, olive oil, garlic, pomegranate molasses, and let your chicken sit in that for a little while
Right.
before you roast it, and then
Yeah.
you can and you need something savory there, like picked oregano leaves or sage leaves, and stick that in the oven, and it becomes all juicy and sweet and sticky by the time it comes out of the oven.
This
And
is
you can
just
serve that with roast potatoes, and that's just really
yeah,
delicious.
so delicious. And rose is something else that actually I've discovered a lot more this year, and I make a rose petal granola
Yeah,
using dried rose petals.
yeah.
And obviously rose petals and rose water is such a feature again, isn't it, in Middle Eastern
Yes,
cooking?
totally. So rose, again, you can take it in the sweet direction, but also there's savory
Can you?
versions. Yeah, you can, for instance, I'm trying to think of a really good use of rose petals. We often use rose petals to finish off pilavs. Like elaborate Middle Eastern rice dishes. Really benefit from that. So you can take like lamb mince and cook it off with onions and garlic and add your rice and kind of cook that slowly together. So it's kind of a lamb and a lamb pilav, and then finish it off with some pomegranate seeds and rose.
Oh,
And it's really, really delicious because we know lamb goes
yes.
well with sweet and sour things, that
Yes.
we take.
And of course pistachios.
And
Pistachios
yeah,
and rose.
that would be really good there as well. So you can finish your pilav with pistachio, rose, and pomegranate. It's
Yeah.
absolutely fantastic.
And pomegranate, from a well-being perspective, we just know, again, so much about it now that it's full of antioxidants. You can buy pomegranate juice. How much of this kind of nod towards well-being and wellness do you take on? Do you think when you're cooking, I'm going to make this because it's extra good for me? Or do you just purely do it on the flavour?
I do it on the flavor. I always have, I think, this subconscious thing that, cooking with all these vegetables must be good.
Must be.
Because that's what we do all day long. I've got a small test kitchen in Camden in North London in which we do all our experiments. And just the other day, we made this, we're talking about vegetables and cakes. We made this courgette bread. So lots of grated courgette with most of the moistures drawn out, and then mixed together with some cheese and egg, and but creating quite a substantial bread out of it. And I thought, like, I'd give that to my children. That is
Yeah.
just such a wonderful thing to do.
Yeah.
It's packed full of courgette, of a vegetable that
Yeah.
is absolutely good for them, with all the fibers. There was some thyme there, some herbs, and I cut a slice, and they absolutely love it. And it's like, instead of a normal slice of bread, they've got
Yes.
all these vegetables in their bread, and they love bread because kids love bread.
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, so nutritious.
Yeah.
And thinking about, using cream and things like that in desserts, do you get tempted to go down the route of using things like kefir? Does kefir feature at all in Middle Eastern cooking? Because I love it. I mean,
Yeah.
I drink
Well,
kefir every day.
Yeah, so it does feature quite a bit. So we use the equivalent like buttermilk or kefir. We
Right.
use that to tenderize meat quite often. It goes into sauces for salads and for roasted vegetables. And like, for instance, I had in my first vegetable cookbook, Plenty, I have aubergines that are roasted and then I make like this buttermilk yogurt. So often I substitute the buttermilk with kefir. So you can
Nice.
mix kefir with yogurt, which are very similar,
Yeah.
and you get a really kind of hyper acidity from that. And that goes because aubergines, when you cook them the way I described, they are quite fatty. So it's very nice to cut that with something sharp and slightly creamy, and that's why yogurt is always so good, or anything dairy
Yeah.
and acidic goes well with things like that, with like roasted aubergine.
Excellent. Oh, I'm glad I got your permission to chuck some kefir into your
You're
recipes.
allowed.
For somebody who is really stuck in a rut and they've, just been cooking the same old things for years, looking at some of your dishes might be a tiny bit scary because they might
Mm,
think, they're quite complicated or there's a lot of different flavors and things going on.
mm.
If you had to pick some highlights out of flavor, what would you suggest that, people perhaps started with just to get a taste of what's going on?
Yeah. Okay. So there's, for instance, I'm just trying to think. Um, a good start, I think, would be things like a hummus.
Okay.
So everybody know how good hummus is for you,
Yeah. So that's your
and
chickpeas
your chickpeas.
and
So
tahini.
and tahini, and lemon juice. And I have two variations on hummus in this book. One of them has a whole what we call, it sounds quite chefy, but actually it's a very easy thing to do, a confit garlic. Which, what happens, you take a whole garlic head and you just chop a bit of the top off, so to expose the cloves. Put a bit of olive oil there and then cover it in foil and stick it in the oven for a good 45 minutes. When it comes out, you can squeeze all that garlic out because it's been cooked essentially. It doesn't feel so garlicky.
Yeah.
We add that to our hummus, which is obviously really, really good
Mm.
for you, all those fresh chickpeas. But you can also use good jarred chickpeas, it's not a
Yeah.
problem. That confit garlic, which is, like I said, an easy thing to make. And then there's two types of toppings we use. One of them is we take some olive oil and add some aromatics, ginger, garlic, chili, and coriander.
Mm-hmm.
Just heat that up slowly, just to infuse the oil bit with these flavors, but also to crispen them up, so you get a bit of texture. And you spoon that on top of your hummus,
Mm.
and everybody likes a hummus, and it's like
Yeah.
super healthy.
Yeah.
And you make your own in a matter of minutes
Yeah.
in
So
this
much
way.
easier and cheaper, isn't it, to make your
Yeah.
own and
I
fresher?
think I think I think it's just so much better, because the thing is, when you
Mm.
buy it in the supermarket, it's cold, and the cold things are just never as good as room temperature things. And it's got a lot of added acidity, citric acid, normally, to give it a long shelf life.
Right.
And so it's just too sharp for me. It's just too sharp and salty. All these things that are added to hummus that's supermarket made make
Yeah.
it give it a longer shelf life, but really take away from the natural flavor of the chickpeas and the
Mm.
tahini and all the rest. So
Mm.
making your own is really a great way to start. We have the equivalent with white bean mash, something quite similar. I'm thinking of other. Oh, we talked
Oh,
about cooking a whole cauliflower.
yes, I love that idea.
Yeah, I've got whole
So easy.
3 recipes that use cooking a whole celeriac.
Oh,
Celeriac,
really? I
yeah,
love
yeah.
celeriac. Tell me, what can I do with a
Celeriac is just an
celeriac?
incredible thing, because, again, like a cauliflower, you can take it, you can stick it in the oven for 3 hours,
Wow, I never
almost as
thought
it
of
is,
that.
just with a bit of oil
Yeah.
and salt. And when it comes out, you can cut it into wonderful wedges, which you could, if you wanted, eat, like we said, with a squeeze of lemon. But I have three derivatives of that celeriac that comes out of the oven, 3 different recipes that use that celeriac. One of them is this with a sweet chili sauce. So you cut
Mm.
the cooked celeriac into big dice or wedges, whatever you want, and you make a quick sweet chili sauce with chili, with soy, with some mirin, like very basic ingredients. You chop some chilies up and some spring onion, coriander, and you make a beautiful platter of cooked
Mm.
celeriac with a spicy, sweet, sour flavor. The other one is the recipe that I really love from the book. It's got celeriac turned into kind of almost like a meat, giving it a meaty context,
Mm.
with what is called a Café de Paris sauce, which is
What is
normally,
that? What's Café de
it's a bit
Paris?
like what when you get in French bistros with your steak. So it's got tarragon and capers and
Ah,
cream. It's
okay.
that kind of, but we make the equivalent to serve with our steak. So it's like a whole big thick celeriac that's been cooked for a long time, became really beautifully brown and flavorsome, and we make that sauce. It's got a tiny bit of curry powder, onions, garlic, butter, and then we finish off with some cream and fresh tarragon. It's so delicious.
Oh, it really, really is. And talk us through, before we finish, about your expanding empire, because you came, when you started in London, what was the first place you were in? Notting Hill, is that right? With your
Yeah,
first deli?
yeah. In 2002, 18 years ago, I opened a
Gosh.
deli in Notting Hill on
Yeah.
Ledbury Road. That's the
Yeah.
first Ottolenghi. And that's where everything started. And after that, we opened a restaurant on Upper Street in Islington, which does that and sit down. I've got 2 West End restaurants, Rovi and Nopi. One restaurant in Spitalfields, in Ottolenghi. And one small deli in Belgravia. So it's
Yeah, it's a lot. And
yeah.
how have you been affected, obviously, by lockdown and presumably everything obviously shut completely?
Yeah,
And
everything
what's it
shut
looking like now?
completely. So we've reopened 3 of our locations at Rovi, in Fitzrovia. That's a restaurant where we cook vegetables on the grill. And not only vegetables, but it's a very vegetable-focused restaurant.
Nice.
And we opened our restaurant on Upper Street and in Notting Hill. So 3 out of the 6 are open. And the other 3 we're looking to open in September when it's a little bit busier, because
Yeah.
central London is still very, very quiet.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it had a really terrible impact on us,
Of
because
course.
like everybody else, we've had to shut and furlough everybody, and
Yeah.
it hasn't been easy. But since we've started reopening towards the end of May, that things are slightly and slowly getting back
Yeah.
to normal. So we'll just
Yeah.
hope that carries on.
And for the future, or is it too hard to predict now because of what's happening? What are your plans for the year ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always working on cookbooks
Good.
because I love making them. So there's always things coming from that department. And yeah, I mean, we want to bring our restaurants back to life, which will take quite a while. And after that, probably more. But it's just that COVID has been such a big thing
Yeah.
that now all the energy and all the focus is on getting all that
Yeah.
back in place.
But I think maybe one of the admittedly very few benefits to have come out of it is perhaps a renewed focus on the quality of the food that we're eating and how it sustains us and nourishes us.
Yeah, I think people have really during lockdown and now post lockdown are really, really interested in food in general.
Yeah.
And what they're eating, what the origin of their ingredients are, how they're using them, and this is not. I don't think that is going away. I think that's definitely staying.
Fantastic. Well, so much inspiration in Flavour. So thank you very much, Yotam. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you, Liz. That was a pleasure.
And I'm afraid that is all we have time for today. Now, you can find all the links and the resources mentioned in today's show over on lizearlewellbeing.com, where you can also sign up to my free weekly newsletter. And this comes to you packed with delicious veg-centric recipes and gut-friendly treats, including Kefir. Huge thanks to all of those who have left us such lovely reviews. You know, it really does help others to find the show. So until the next time, go well. Bye-bye. The Liz Earle Wellbeing Show is presented by me, Liz Earle, with production by Amaryllis Earle and Harry Trevithick at Heart Dialogue, with thanks to my producer Ellie Smith and guest booker Millie de la Morinière.